Robert Whitaker versus Darren Till. Now, this fight card flew under the radar. You know, with all the hype and pompous of Fight Island, obviously we had Kamaru Usman and Jorge Masvidal really kind of garner all the media attention and heat there. We had Kelvin Cater, Dan Ide, Davison Figueroa, Joseph Benavidez. So this one really was a kind of an under the radar card, if you were to so to speak. Not if you're really into the UFC, and not if you're into the middleweight division, which is a really stacked division and it has its own, hype and drama in its own particular regard. Look, let's dive in straight into the analysis of this fight. This one was a very interesting one for me. And obviously, we're recording this in Sydney, Australia. There is a bit of a disposition and bias towards Robert Whitaker. Interestingly enough, as a fight pick, I had Darren Till winning this. I just thought that, the strength and the size of Till would be too much and would potentially, outwork and overpower Robert Whitaker. Boy, was I wrong. But let's talk about this fight specifically, because there's levels of appreciation, and I've spoken about this in countless other videos, but I actually watched this fight for the first time without audio. Now, I was outdoors, I was in a restaurant, and I definitely wanted to keep up to date, but I think it was interesting because when I was watching this fight without audio and on a mobile device, it was a really boring fight for me. I'll be quite honest, and maybe that's because of a lack of technical prowess in terms of understanding the things that were going on. But really, what I saw was a Whitaker that was swinging for the fences and missing, quite a lot. I saw a lot of hesitation from Darren Till, and effectively, I saw a very sloppy fight. On my first view, I thought that, there wasn't a lot of action, there wasn't a lot of pace. And it was upon the conclusion of the fight when I, obviously went to YouTube and Twitter and just saw what the pundits were talking about. A lot of people had, it was split. You had people in the camp that were saying, this was a pretty exciting fight. It was a chess, a high stakes chess match, to which it was, by the way. And there was a large chunk of people that felt the same way that I did. And it got me thinking, why am I thinking like that? It's because of how spoiled we've been in the last couple of fights in terms of actions. I mean, Poirier Hooker was one. We love the blood. We love strike fests. We love people to swing like, bite down on the mouthpiece and produce, violent knockouts. That's, the majority. I can't speak for everyone, but that's what the majority of people want. But this wasn't that fight. And that doesn't make it any less interesting, and that doesn't make it any less impressive. And this was an impressive fight for Robert Whitaker. And upon watching it a second, third, fourth time, I think it's really dawned to me how impressive this fight was and how much was in stake here. Because really, the winner here is catapulted back into, the middleweight title picture. And one would think for Robert Whitaker that he potentially needs to go through Hermansson, or there's probably room enough there with this particular performance to potentially get him Izzy straight after this Costa fight. So look, let's pick up the analysis of this particular fight, because I've set the table here. It was an interesting fight. Round one came in, and I think the whole metaphor for this particular fight was the first couple of seconds. Darren Till comes in really aggressively and walks straight into a right hand by Whitaker. It was almost Till saying, you know what, these are my aggressions to be outwardly aggressive, intentions rather. And Robert Whitaker saying, hold on, soldier, because you're going to face this jab for the totality of the night. And that's exactly what happened. In various iterations, I think if I can surface the elements, and I've written it down, that really led to this Whitaker victory, it was a totality of things, but this really was a high-stakes chess match. And I think almost to a flaw. And the reason that in the first time I watched this without sound, I had Izzy Adesanya, Yoel Romero vibes. No one was throwing anything. It really hyper exciting for me, and there were a lot of feints, but nothing was being thrown. And I felt, oh my goodness, are we gonna see something like Izzy and Yoel again? Because I can't take that. I can't take that. And understand that at the core, that these are two counter strikers. Till was talking about this throughout the press conferences, saying that like he hasn't had those wars, and nor does he necessarily want to be in them. Obviously, Whitaker's been 10 rounds with Yoel Romero, and one would say that if he wants to continue the longevity of his career, he didn't want to. So they came in with very interesting sort of game plans, and I think in the first round, what we saw was a fair amount of what happened with Whitaker and Adesanya. His range just wasn't there. And this fight, I think, is a striker's dream if you really understand distance management, and the two levels upon which this fight was being fought at. And there were two levels. One was within striking distance, and the other was in the pocket. And the thing is, Robert Whitaker was swinging with intentions throughout the totality of the fight and really missing for a large chunk of it. And it really kind of harkened back through the Israel Adesanya fights when he was lunging through carelessly. And in the first round, you saw that. He came in carelessly, and it looked like a straight right, but it ended up being, I believe, an elbow, and it rocked Robert. It really rocked Robert. But after that, he was able to kind of recover. But the first round was Darren Till's. In the second round is where we really see Whitaker come into his own in terms of establishing a cadence and establishing a really awkward cadence of striking. Now, this is an interesting thing because Robert Whitaker comes with a lot of different movements. And while these two fighters are counter strikers and fight within the pocket, Robert Whitaker's style is really awkward. He's always moving, and that level of awkward movement and cadence in striking really carried through, and really was one of the main reasons that Darren Till could not, you know, there was a lot of feints being thrown by both guys. And I think it may have been round 3 where you just had like a stare off and like just a feint off. No one wanted to throw. And I think that was one of the frustrating elements that I personally had as a fan watching here. But like, again, just to note, Whitaker's awkward movements and cadence really helped him there. He had the stronger levels of output throughout the course of the fight. Till's legs were obviously compromised somewhere in between 2 and 3, and I believe it wasn't 2, and he talks about it. And there was no doubt that this had an effect. And in the second round, this is where we see really the game plan, or not necessarily the game plan, but the bread and butter of what caused Whitaker to win. And it was the awkward movements. When he was fighting at striking distance, Whitaker wasn't overly effective. But when he was really in the pocket, those awkward overhands and those jabs and that would land and landed at frequency. He was playing a little bit of a frequency game. And for some reason, whether it was, you know, lack of cardio, maybe a bit of a hard thing, but as it progressed, you really did not see Till able to throw. And obviously, if his legs was compromised in round 2 or somewhere along the round 3, then obviously that would also add to it. Till naturally, had difficulty adjusting here, and what we saw was diversity in striking and movement. Not only the totality of the movement that Whitaker had, which was really awkward, but it was also the cadence. It was just really weird, coming from different sort of angles. Those overhands would come from up to down. The jabs that he would come, he was throwing a lot of different outputs that Till necessarily wasn't managing. And Till spoke about this at the press conference, and that he felt that he had the power shots, but Whitaker definitely had the more activity, and that definitely counts here. Yeah, it was really interesting to see, and I think just to harken back to this high level chess match, there was points in the third and fourth round where these guys were just feinting on each other, and it was really interesting because while Whitaker has a lot of kind of footwork, and Darren Till obviously with a compromised leg was stationary there. He didn't pull the trigger, and I think when he did pull the trigger, in rounds 4, for example, he landed, and he definitely does have the heavier sort of strikes here. But Whitaker was able to masterfully integrate various different sort of strikes. He was able to initiate a couple of grappling exchanges throughout the totality, and for the most part, especially when you're dealing with a fight such as this that has a fair amount of implications in terms of where people move on, but more importantly, for two individuals that are really competitive and really close, for all that Whitaker was doing, it was a relatively close match. And for example, in the 5th round where Whitaker, took Till down, that was just the punctuation. That was the crescendo. That was the end moment to really punctuate what was a really interesting fight. But, when I go back and think about it, I think about, 2020 has been a year of an amazing fights. We've seen some absolute bloodbaths. We've seen some wars. We've seen elite level of striking. But this was a very different caliber of a fight, and one that I definitely want to go back and watch again because it was so technical. And I think that sometimes if you're a watcher that's conditioned to a certain level of output, and you really want a certain sort of fight style, you can really come away not necessarily appreciating it. So I really urge people to watch this fight a couple of different times, because I think that, there's been talks about, the Holloway and the Volkanovski fights being really technical. This was a striker's a dream, and really a blueprint in terms of how to adapt in fights. And I really think that in this particular fight, we saw the 10 rounds and the ways that Whittaker had to really dig deep against Yoel Romero, kind of stand up, and I really think that this was the difference. The diversity in striking attacks. He was still swinging and missing on the first round to the fifth round rather. But it was that mixing up of diversity until it was like, there were two bulls that were just staring at like a red light, and they were waiting for a green light to pull, and Till just didn't get there for whatever reason. He just wasn't able to let his hands go. And I think it's really interesting because you run with these elite counter strikers, and at the top of the division, if you have two counter strikers, the striker that's able to adjust and come with a diversity of attack really kind of wins. And Robert Whittaker was able to come with a W here. So what next? What next for both parties? Darren Till, look, he's still relatively young. He'll definitely learn from this. From a front optics perspective, you don't really know how badly his feet were compromised, and if that had a really big part to play. I really think he needs to throw his hands a bit more, because there's no doubt that he has a lot of heat in it. I guess that could be a mindset and strategy thing. For Robert Whittaker, this vaults him straight into the picture in my mind. He's one or two fights there. Hermansson lines up very well for me. I like that. I like that as a title qualifier personally. But look, a really interesting fight, guys. That was my analysis. Please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, leave some comments below, and chat soon. Peace.